What's going on, fishy friends? And thank you so much for tuning in to the Crazyhorse Fishing Hour. This is a show I've been looking forward to for a long time. I understand how important electronics are on a boat, particularly your Fishfinder and your GPS units. We were just talking about it on the Captain's Corner with Cole Langley, the importance of safety. And, you know, your GPS and your navionics on your maps is a huge benefit for making sure you have a safe day on the water. But we're going to get into a lot of the mystique, the mystery around using your sonar, using your Fishfinder, and break that down with Kevin Conroy tonight, who is a Humminbird rep. He's a Maryland native and knows a ton about this kind of thing. But I'm going to go ahead and bring in Kevin. How you doing, Kevin?
Good. How are you doing tonight?
Doing really well. You know, Kevin is part of a family business that he started with his father 30 years ago. He grew up on the Severn River. You guys, you know, give back. You work with the DNR and wildlife organizations. You know, you're a rep with Humminbird, who was the first to come out with side imaging. You've done a lot of stuff, and we can get to it as we, you know, go through the evening. But, you know, tell us about Kevin.
Yeah, definitely. So the company I work directly for is called Comar Sales. We're a manufacturer's rep group. We represent a lot of marine electronics-based products in the marine industry. One of those products which we represent is Humminbird. They specialize in manufacturing what we call MFDs, which is multifunctional devices. That's basically what your Fishfinder is now. As well as transducers and other accessories kind of in that field. That's mainly my background. I grew up in Annapolis for most of my life. I live over in Edgewater now and fish most of the Chesapeake Bay, but I guess the Bay Bridge waters are kind of my home.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Chesapeake Bay is definitely one of those places where you need a Fishfinder. You got to have that GPS because it's a lot of water. I remember when I first started fishing the bay, I was fishing it from a kayak, and I grew up fishing lakes or ponds. And the moment you get on that open bay, you're just like, it's intimidating because it's a lot of water. So that Fishfinder and GPS is absolutely necessary. But tell us, Kevin, I feel like reading a Fishfinder is like interpreting a different language. For the longest time, I'd see what I now know is bait, right? Yep. And I would sit out and fish over that for hours, like, oh my God, there's so many fish there that you can't even tell the difference between
them. How are they not biting?
Right. How are they not biting? Can you talk to us a little bit about that language and how you've learned it and you know, how you've come to be the expert on you know, reading Fishfinders now?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if we'll go as far as expert, but I'm okay at it. I'm good some days. But yeah, there's a lot of things I've learned over the years, and two of the bigger lessons have been that there's not really a one size fits all. And what I mean by that is there's no one setting for every scenario when it comes to sonar. You know, conditions change, bottom hardness change, water clarity. There's a bunch of different stuff that can affect sonar, and you need to be able to adjust for that. And that's really one of the biggest things. People ask me all the time, you know, can you set my unit up? I could for where we are that moment, but you know, if you fish a different area in 10 minutes, I might adjust settings by then. And a lot of that comes down to really simplifying it though. You know, there's a lot of different things you can fine tune and adjust and play with. But you can also make it a lot more simple than that and just kind of focus on a few different settings and whatnot and really dial in what you're looking for. But some of the big settings, I guess, to look at if we want to start there, at least from a Humminbird standpoint, some people use different terminology, but from our terms would be sensitivity and gain. And where that's really important is basically on your side imaging, your Dowd imaging, your 2D imaging. it's going to affect the brightness and darkness of an image. So the higher you turn up your sensitivity, the brighter an object's going to be, the lower it is, the darker it's going to be, and vice versa for contrast. The higher you turn it up, the darker it's going to be, the lower you have it, the brighter it's going to be. That basically applies to 2D side imaging and down imaging. And I guess I should kind of break that down a little more as well. When it comes to sonar, you have a lot of different types nowadays. You have your traditional 2D sonar, which is what I would say most of our normal customers are used to using. It's been around a very long time, and it's still a very good technology. You then have down imaging, which from there is taking your 2D image and processing it in a different way and a higher frequency. And it's giving you a much more detailed version of what you're looking at. It's great to compare the two, and kind of, it's a great example is your bait story. If you're running down imaging and 2D imaging and you're on bait, on your down imaging, you should probably be able to pick out that it's bait. Where on 2D, I could see it could be a little harder, especially to newer people. Yeah. On your down imaging, it's going to really clear things up a bit.
Yeah, I wanted to interrupt you really quick, Kevin. A gentleman chimed in here and just mentioned that he has a low wrench unit, but I'm sure there will still be things I can learn here. Absolutely. Kevin is a Humminbird guy. I can put that up on the screen. He's a Humminbird guy, but I've owned Garmin, I've owned Lowrance, I've owned Humminbird, and there are definitely things in terms that he's using, the sensitivity term he's using, that may be called something on another unit, but these things are going to be common, whatever brand you got. There may be a few things, small little minor things, but I think most of what Kevin's talking about tonight will help you whether you have Garmin, Raymarine, Simrad, Lowrance, Humminbird or whatever.
Yes, definitely. And a lot of this is just kind of, some other manufacturers call sensitivity gain. And there's some, nuances in there, but a lot of it will be the basics, and we can answer some questions and kind of go from whatever you guys would like to cover.
Speaking of questions, the winner of the best question of the night that'll be chosen by Kevin Conroy here will win a prize.
Yes, I got some hats here for you guys, some Humminbird and Minn Kota hats. They are actually a part of the same company, Johnson Outdoors. So I do work for both of them, and I'm sure many of you have both products on your boat, hopefully. So I will send out some hats and maybe some other goodies I find at my office.
Well, those are some sweet looking hats. I like them. I like them a lot. You were talking a little bit about the 2D imaging before I interrupted you.
No, not at all.
Go ahead. And just sort of saying how the industry started with that a long time ago, and then we went on to down imaging.
Yeah, now we're at down imaging as well as side imaging, which is probably the technology that excites me the most. It really just broadens your horizon of how much water you can cover. And the detail in which you can cover that now is very impressive as well. With your traditional 2D, it is a sonar cone, kind of like this. Whereas side imaging, you actually shoot beams out sideways and down like that, but nothing directly down. What's important about that is you cover a lot more water when you are going straight out to the side than straight down. Right. You can cover anywhere from 100 to 300 feet to each side of the boat using side imaging. That's 600 feet of water in each pass. Your traditional 2D cone is not going to cover nearly that.
That's amazing.
You have to be in a ton of water for a 2D cone to cover 600 feet.
Yeah, Kevin, real quick, you mentioned that it's, shot out beams, right? For those that are, just learning their Fishfinder or may not know their Fishfinder really well, what are those beams and what exactly is that doing?
Basically what it is it's very similar to what dolphins and other marine animals use to communicate. And it's a sonar pulse that goes through the water and it pings off something. And then that signal returns to the unit. And that's how it creates a signal. What's kind of a good way to explain that is when you have your 2D sonar cone and a fish swims through it, people like to see that nice arch on the 2D screen. The reason that happens is the fish is, something like, one of those arches there. The reason that's happening is the fish is swimming in and out of the cone where basically it's closer at one point because it's directly under it. and it's further away at the other because the beam's further out, and that's why you get that arch. So when the fish is directly underneath that sonar transducer, it's the highest point, and then it kind of falls off to each side. And that's basically that beam going down, reflecting off of the target and coming back up, whether it be the bottom, a fish, a rock, and the hardness of that object is going to also determine how that return looks on the screen. If you're over a rock bottom, it's going to look very different than if you're over a silt bottom if you're running the same settings.
Right.
Now,
well, let's look at some of these images that you shared, and maybe you can give us a little bit of a breakdown of what you think the bottom would be. Let's look at the image we just looked at.
Yeah. So here is a pretty good example, actually, of the sonar being able to read through the fish to get to the bottom. And these could even be bait on the bottom, but it's most likely the bottom and some bait mixed in there. But these are all bigger fish on the bottom here. I believe this was actually a shot from Nick Lombardi. And I was told these were cobia on the bottom. And then these are false albacore and amberjacks on the top here that were getting flipped out of the water by the cobia and whatnot. And that was a really cool shot because you can just see the denseness of the cobia on the bottom compared to the, smaller but still good sized fish up top. They're not bait fish, but they still have some size to them.
But the bottom density on this picture looks a little bit different than, say, this one.
Well, on this one, what you're looking at is really just a big feed on bait. So on the left side of the screen, or at least it's the left side to me, I hope it's the same for you all, is where you're just seeing a dense cluster of red. That is all bait fish. And then when you're seeing what we call spaghetti, but kind of the strung out stripers.
It almost looks like a bale of hay on the right side, or like a scraggly bush. Yeah.
And that is the gold mine right there. I mean, basically those are, active eating fish targeting that bait mass. It's always disappointing when you just find the bait mass and don't find, the other end of it. But that really is what you would love to see. I mean, that's fish on bait, which is, common in the bay, and that's what we're really looking for.
But you were talking about solid bottoms, and a solid bottom, with the way the settings were in this case, would be a big, thick red bottom, right?
Yes. And in that case, it's really tough. I love when people post screenshots and will ask you, what you think. Even if you post settings and stuff, because every unit's a little different, but the bottom can vary so much. I mean, you can make a completely silt bottom look like a rock bottom if you have your settings really high, or, whatever way tuned up to make it hot. If you tune it way down on a hard bottom, you can still make it look soft. So that's kind of key when you're understanding sonar, is just, you never want it too blown out. If you go over, tiny 10, 15, 20-inch striper, and they look like they're, 50-inch striper, they're big red marks, there's a lot of density to them, your, sensitivity might be a little too high. But if you're going over, decent sized stripers that are 25, 30 inches and you're not even marking them, then it's probably too low. And you can do that a lot by where you launch your boat. If it's all silt, you can kind of play with your settings there and say, okay, this is what I know it should kind of look like, and this is a silt bottom. If I know I'm on an oyster shoal, I can adjust it there and see what it kind of looks like. One of the best things I was ever told, and it's one of the hardest things to do while you're on the water, is, put your rod down for a minute and just play with your sonar. And it's almost impossible to do. And it's the best days are probably when you have really hard fishing days, because you look at it for the longest amount of time. Those are probably the biggest learning days, but it's not going to be something you'll learn overnight, but it definitely kind of helps to get a good basis under you of what you're really looking at. And if you, at least on our units, you can freeze the screen on your side imaging, 2D, whatever, and adjust the settings to see what it would look like. So if you go over something, you can freeze it and tune it to see how you want it to be exactly. That's something I find really helpful, because if you just, stop your boat, freeze the screen, say, hey, this doesn't look how I want it to look. And then you just adjust the 2 or 3 settings to where you want it to look. And now you're like, all right, I'm good for this area. You'll eventually get past that where you just do it on the fly, and it's all kind of to your eye and what you like. I've been on some guys' boats who I think are very good at reading sonar, who read it. They run a way darker image or a way brighter image than I would run, but it all depends on a lot of personal touch and sometimes what you're looking for. If you're scanning for a ton of fish, you might run totally different settings than if you're looking for a few in, shallow water or whatnot.
Yeah. One thing I've always noticed about Humminbird, and it's, to me, one of their greatest assets and one of the greatest drawbacks, is Humminbird has a lot of settings on all of their units. There's a ton of settings, and that's great. But I used to find it too much, and I would just be playing with the settings the whole time instead of fishing. But you've said a lot already, though, that what I've learned through the years is that each situation, if you're fishing in 40 feet of water and using your side imaging, you're going to need different settings than 20 feet of water. There's really no such thing as out of the box settings for any unit, because you got to adjust it for different scenarios. But we're talking about 2D first. We're going to get to side imaging here in a minute. For 2D, you brought up gain, you brought up sensitivity, and pardon the long question, but what would be some other settings on any unit that someone can tweak to ensure that they get the best 2D image?
One thing that doesn't really have to exactly do with tweaking for the best image, but it's something I've found to be helpful, is different color palettes. I prefer to run a blue background with, red as your hot, which is basically your strongest return. Other guys, it kind of all depends on what brand you started with. Like, I think Garmin actually has the blue one usually. Lowrance uses the white. Everyone's kind of got their own palette, but then they all, offer a lot of the other color choices. And it's kind of whatever comes to your eye, but I've always liked the darker background where the red is really going to pop and make it obvious. So that's one setting that's not major or anything, but I think it does make a difference. Another one is, this is often a question that gets brought up on really, really soft bottom, is if you're losing bottom in like a creek or something like that, and it's really shallow and soft bottom, you can adjust your range. So your sonar does not, or knows not to shoot past, say, 5 feet, 6 feet, whatever it might be.
Oh, interesting.
When you're getting those double bottoms in shallow, or it's reading 70 feet and it's 5 feet. That's very common in very soft bottoms, as the sonar can't even really find a bottom. It's so mucky that it, just keeps penetrating.
That's interesting. Yeah, a lot of our units are going to be automatically set to auto range. But if it's a soft bottom, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Another good 2D tip is scroll speed. A lot of people, I'm sure, watching the show and who follow you all probably jig on the bay, and scroll speed is usually very important. What scroll speed is how quick kind of everything moves around, or how quick your data moves down the line. And then what's really important there is what's called the A scope, which is, would you mind pulling up another 2D image?
Yeah, you're actually answering. I want to make sure D-Train gets eligible for his question, because you're answering his question right now. He says, what is the best speed when using your sonar? Can you explain how to use the A scope, please? And I will pull up. Do you have a particular one of the 2D images in mind?
Any of them should be fine. I just really want to point out where the area is. So basically what you're looking at, your A scope, is the area. I think I'm looking at this the right way, fully on the right side of the screen. At least it's my right side, but where the sonar reading begins. And that bar, or that area to the right where it's kind of all blurred and there's no definition, that is your A scope. That is basically the closest thing to live sonar before live sonar actually happened.
You're talking about the vertical bar on the far right part of the screen that's got numbers going 20, 40, 60, 80 on it, right?
Correct. Just to the right of that little area between the depths and the end of the screen where you have color in there, that is your scope. And what that basically does is it's, as live as it can be. And when you're running your scroll speed at 10, it's going to be the most up-to-date data. And basically people who like to jig watch that frequently to see if they have a red mark coming up. All right, there's a fish there. There's big fish. In this case, you already know there's a history of big fish behind you, so you're in a good position. But when it's just starting off, your A scope can be very, very useful to use. And that scroll speed can help you get the most up-to-date data.
Yeah, that A scope is very similar to like the old technology. I mean, I guess it's really the same technology when it was just a sounder, right?
Yep, exactly. That's the same technology there, and it still works great. Obviously, as we can get into later on, we do have live sonar now, and there's a lot of very cool products that get even more technical and whatnot. But for most people, they're going to have 2D sonar, and this is a really good way to utilize it, to especially know right when those fish are getting under you.
Got it. Well, we have a couple of questions rolling in that I think we'll get to before we get into side imaging, which I'm sure is going to be a hot topic.
Yeah.
But Rodney asked, Kevin, what new technologies would you like to see on the Humminbird locators?
What new technologies would I like to see? I would like to see probably more of our popular freshwater products grow in the saltwater, such as Mega 360 or Mega Live. Right now, we're hindered a little bit with mounting applications as the fishing styles are just kind of different. In freshwater, a lot of people fish strictly around the trolling motor, and they can mount everything to that. Where saltwater, there's a lot of different scenarios. You might use the trolling motor for one, you might do this for another. There's many different options, but I think the technology there is fantastic, and I think there's a lot of different applications and ways to use it that we haven't fully utilized yet.
Colin with Big Yacker Fishing says side imaging covers a larger area, but is there a time when down imaging is preferable over side imaging?
I honestly like to run them a lot together. I usually almost always run them together. If you're vertical jigging, I would say down imaging is way more important than side imaging. It kind of depends, where your target is. If you're lucky enough to be right on top of them, down imaging is perfect. But I still love to always be running side imaging. Just, if those fish move, you might catch them going up way further to the side of the boat or one way behind, wherever it might be, you're covering more water. So there's definitely times where I think down imaging or 2D imaging is more important, but I will rarely be on a boat without side imaging turned on.
Yeah, I think having down and side at the same time is really your best way. And I've seen most captains that I fish with have done the same thing. But down imaging is going to basically let you know, it's going to give you one more piece of data to help you figure out where those fish are, whether they are if they're starboard or port, far off to one side or the other. They're probably not going to show up on down imaging. But if they show up on down imaging, you can be pretty certain that they're directly under the boat.
Yeah, and I love it running them in conjunction because it really, fills that hole in the middle. Side imaging has a black hole in the middle because there's not any beam going straight down, and that completes the picture kind of. So I really like doing that.
One thing that I want to ask you that I think will help, maybe some of the newer people to reading sonar is when you're looking at an image. So let's pull up one of the images now. Okay, there's a history. This is kind of like telling you a story of what's happened.
Definitely.
I've seen captains before say, "We're right over fish. We're going over fish now," and then I see an angler run to the front of the boat. Right.
Every time.
What's that?
I said every time.
They run to the front of the boat because they're like, we're going over them now. So they think, that's where they need to be. But in that image, what are they really looking at?
So what you're really looking at is, the bait is well behind you now. It could be, what's the boat going? 1.4 miles an hour. It could be 10, 20, 30 feet behind you, 40 feet.
Depending on how fast it's scrolling, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, scroll speed, how fast the boat's moving, a few different factors. But it's now behind you. And the only thing that is live is really that A scope we just talked about. But what's right behind it is pretty good as well. But when we're fishing for redfish or something and we're running side imaging really far out and they're not showing themselves or anything, we're strictly looking on side imaging, I'll see someone always they'll do this. I'll say go cast to the left, and they'll cast off the front of the boat to the left. And there's nothing in front of you. Well, there could be, but you don't know that.
You don't know yet.
Fish behind me. So knowing what boat you're on is kind of important in that regard. Most boats on the Chesapeake, or at least center consoles, will have a transom mounted transducer. What that means is the transducer, which produces part of the sonar image, is mounted to the transom of the boat. And that is where that A-scope image is coming directly from. So you always want, if someone's reading directly off sonar and says cast to the left, they should probably say your back port or whatever. But, that is where you want to go, is behind you. Now, some of the bigger head boats, they run through-hull transducers. Those can vary a little bit more in placement, but no matter what, it's usually going to be behind you. A few guys do have some types of forward-looking sonar. You can kind of do that with live sonar. But for the most part, everything is always behind you, and I often see people run the wrong way.
Yeah. Ben Price asked, how are Garmin?
Garmin makes a very good product. I think they have a really great user interface. I don't run it as often just because I am, employed partially by Humminbird, but they do make a lot of good products, and I've been a leader in the industry for a long time.
Let's see. We have a question from Chuck Marshall, who asks, for Humminbird units longevity, which batteries are best to use? Lead acid, AGM, or lithium?
We don't really have a stance on any of it, really. We are more than okay with lithium, or, I run AGMs on my boat personally. Would love to make the switch to lithium one day, but I don't have all that money. Lead acid's great as well. We don't really have a stance on anything for the Humminbird unit. I haven't really seen batteries affect a unit too much, besides low voltage. A lot more of it is wiring, undersizing wire, and kind of some other issues regarding that.
Yeah, I mean, I can just tell you guys, lithium's going to weigh way less. It's going to weigh a lot less than the others, and it's also going to last a lot longer in terms of the number of times that you can charge it. But in terms of how they, allow the units to last longer or die younger, as far as I know, there's no correlation there.
Yeah, no, there's nothing that I'm aware of, and I've seen people use all three brands without any issues. So,
yeah. Alan Batista, how you doing, Alan? He asked, where is the industry heading with their next gen products?
It's a great question. There's a lot of things that are constantly moving and changing, and I'm beyond impressed with how much kind of sonar as a whole has changed in the last 5 years. I think a lot of future sonar products will probably be based a lot around live sonar. I think the technology is super cool, and you're seeing underwater unlike ever before, besides a video camera, basically. You can see how fish react to your bait. You can see how your bait moves. You can see the structure in real time. There's a lot of cool features. I think we're all just trying to figure out, the best mounting applications, what works. A lot of these live transducers have different mounting placements, so you can adjust the way the sonar reads with different angles. When you mount something like that permanently, you really can't do that. So that's kind of an issue on a lot of these boats. But I think a lot of the future technology will be based around that, as well as probably trying to get the most out of side imaging you can possibly get, meaning better range and better detail. That's kind of always been our goal, and the technology just continues to grow.
Well, we've got a lot more questions coming in, and guys, we're going to try to get to everyone's question. I might not be able to get to people's second question, as I see some people have asked a few second questions already. But if we have time, we certainly will. But I want to go ahead and jump into side imaging. Side imaging isn't necessarily new anymore. We're moving a lot to this live imaging, live scope, which I personally don't think I'll ever get to. I think I need to separate myself enough from the technology. If the fishing ever gets that hard, I might go that way, but I'm nowhere near that yet. But side imaging is no longer really the newest thing on the block, but I think a lot of people are still confused, or they look at it and there's still quite a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah. if you actually want to bring up that side imaging one graphic we have, I can kind of just describe that a little bit. So this is a little graphic I just stole from one of our Humminbird videos here. And this is just kind of depicting what side imaging really is. And this is an older video. We can probably get more than 200 feet of range to each side. I've seen between 300 and 400 feet to each side.
Yeah.
On some of the larger units with larger screens, it gets a little easier. But basically what you're looking at here is, a picture of the bottom underwater and the sonar beam going out and down and its coverage. You are not going to get coverage directly underneath the boat, but you're going to get it fully to the sides and pretty close to underneath and at a very large distance. That distance to me is what is most important, but the level of detail we're able to bring in as well is pretty awesome. If you're looking for 1,000 redfish, you don't need the details much. But if you're looking for a few, striped bass on the flats or redfish or whatever it might be, it really helps to be able to see the image in a lot more detail. Or if you're trying to figure out what the bottom is or the structure around you or anything like that, the level of detail is really improved dramatically the last, 5 or so years.
One thing that I'll say, and we're not sponsored by any brand of Fishfinder here at the fishing channel. There's no strings attached. But I will say, and I think I won't find too much argument, is that Humminbird, for some reason, has the best side imaging. And before you respond to that, I'll just say that I've looked at the specs comparing, let's say some of Garmin's higher end units, and they match in terms of screen resolution and signal strength. They match the Humminbirds. And in some cases, they actually seem like they're a little better until you get on the water, and Humminbird you can see the fins on a fish on side imaging. It is just like, it is a holy blank bam moment when you see a Helix, Solix, Apex unit compared to anything else. Why is that?
There's a lot of things. One thing we did first was, first the recreational market was shooting 1.2 megahertz. And what usually happens with sonar is as you increase your frequency, which is what your megahertz are or kilohertz, you increase your detail, but you lose a lot of range. So when we first came out with mega imaging, that's why, 1.2 megahertz, mega imaging, we were able to get to about 100 feet to each side and, in a fair bit of detail, pretty darn good. But we then came out with Mega Plus, and that really upped the game with a lot more range and a lot more detail in the image. And when we did that, we didn't really reinvent the wheel or come out with a new frequency or anything. It's just a lot of how you process your image and kind of take in all the data you're receiving. And I used to think as soon as everyone else shot in megahertz, it looked the same. And I, quickly learned that that's not the case. And it's something Humminbird has excelled at for a long time, is image quality, whether it be down imaging or side imaging. We've always really excelled at image quality. And I think people who ran Humminbird 10, 15 years ago would probably say the same thing, but it's really kind of taken it to another level in the last few years.
So what I'm hearing is, the signal that I don't want to pick on any brand, that brand B is sending out may be as strong as the Humminbird, but it's when it comes back, how that data is processed. Is that?
A lot of it is.
That makes a lot of sense.
And I used to be under the belief that as soon as you got the same, frequency, it's all the same, but it's definitely not. There's a lot that goes into sonar and elements and all this stuff within it. And it's very technical. We have some absolutely brilliant engineers, and it's pretty cool.
It's kind of like Z-Man, right? It's like they won't give out the chemical compound that makes that bait stretch like this and not get torn in half by toothy critters. Same thing with Humminbird. They're not going to tell us what it is, because then people could reproduce it.
It's very cool to see, and I couldn't believe the first time I ever saw it, the detail we were seeing.
Well, let's look at some of that detail before we get to some more audience questions. This was an interesting one, and just in terms of shape, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, this is a shot from Alan Batista, actually, who is, I believe, on this show right now. So this was a underwater ship, I believe, that he went over, and I think it's a great shot. He's in 11 feet of water. So in 11 feet of water, your traditional 2D cone is going to be, very small, maybe 3-6 feet wide, not terribly big. Here he's covering 75 feet to each side. And he's also basically getting all the detail on the boat. I mean, you can see sticks in there, the mast. I mean, there's a ton of detail.
I mean, you can see the skeletons of the people still in there.
There's some areas in the image, on the corners kind of where he's losing the image a little bit to blockage, probably due to the ship itself at some point.
Right.
There's been something coming up that's actually blocking the transducer signal from getting a return over there. But that's a pretty amazing shot and really just shows the level of detail. We can get a lot more range than that, but it's hard to beat that level of detail.
Now, Kevin, I have a question. So there's a black stripe, obviously, in the middle of the screen, and then kind of a void area to either side of that black stripe. And then there's an image on either side. Could you take that image and basically push them together, like I guess seeing them together, and would that be it, or is there actually a void below you that you're missing?
Nope, you just basically nailed it perfectly. We actually have a great demo in our catalog, and I believe it's on our website as well. But you want to look at side imaging how it is on the screen here, but you want to crumple it together, basically like you have a T or a triangle in the middle. You fold it together to where the image comes all together and you do not see the black area below you. What the black area is really just an absence. There's no sonar beam going directly down, so there's nothing to come back up to give you that exact return. So that black area beneath you is right where your 2D or down imaging is going to show, and that's a great way to kind of look at side imaging is when you run them side by side. You can kind of complete the whole image when you see what's directly below you. And hey, this isn't two random halves of a ship that were just cut perfectly down the middle where I ran over. It's just the absence of the return directly below me, and it's actually one big ship. And if you scanned it from the other direction, you would see that if you went all along the side, that there's no break in it. It's one big piece.
That's really cool. Let's look at another image. Wow, that looks like the same boat, but just come over in a different direction.
And yeah, and here you can kind of see how important it is what angle you hit stuff at. And this is also a great example of kind of hardness and brightness of returns and whatnot. So on the ship here to your left, you're getting a very, bright yellow hard return. There's a lot of density to the object, where to the right, it's, probably more silty bottom. It might be sand, but it's most likely siltier. It's a very darker return. And that'll kind of tell you what bottom you're looking at. If you go over a spot and you go from all, darker returns like that on the right, and then it gets bright, you're starting to go over some harder bottom. Now when you get to that harder bottom, you might adjust your settings a little bit because it gets too hot or whatever it might be. But it's good to be able to identify the break-in bottoms or break-in structure or whatever it might be. I mean, a lot of guys in the Gulf have been using our side imaging to find, little patches of hard bottom for grouper and all sorts of stuff. And it's just a slight difference in the color, but when you have a good eye, you can pick it out. And depending on the species you're targeting, it can make a real difference.
Well, just like we talked about with the 2D imaging, and Alan has his unit dialed in really well.
He's tough to beat.
What's that?
He's tough to beat. He's one of the best.
But can we talk about some settings that people can use on all of their units, regardless of the brand, that could help them get the most out of their side imaging units?
Yeah. I think there's a few things. Well, kind of what we talked to in the beginning, but for a Humminbird, as well as many other units, your sensitivity, your contrast, and then the other really important one is range. When it comes to range, I like to run my range right to where you kind of start to lose a picture. Right at the edge, it starts to get black and darker, and you're starting to lose it. Whether it's 100 feet, 200 feet, 350 feet, a lot of that will depend on depth. Some of it will depend on bottom hardness. I've read 80 feet in 2 feet of water, but I've also had other times where I could only get 50 feet. It kind of can depend on a lot of different variables. But the range is definitely important. I see people running it way tighter than it could be. People oftentimes recommend 3 times your depth. That is way underestimating the power of the technology. Side imaging in shallow water is one of the best technologies out there. It will blow 2D out of the water. Down imaging, you can cover, at least with our product, anywhere between 50 to 150 feet of water in 5 or less feet of water.
Yeah.
That's a huge deal. You could never see more than a foot or two with 2D imaging, and it's almost useless at that point, besides knowing how deep the water is. That's one of the biggest tips I could give anyone is, learn side imaging, but definitely learn how big of a tool it is in shallow water, and don't be limited by what people, believe the ranges should be and, what you hear online. Get used to the unit and see where your range starts to fade. When you're losing that picture, probably cap it there. I adjust my range a fair bit because you go over humps, lumps, it goes from 10 feet to 25. You're going to make adjustments. But that way you're always maximizing the amount of, water you're covering.
This next question is a really good one, and I think it adds an additional piece to this discussion. I've been fishing with Steve Griffin, a captain here on the bay, Chesapeake Bay, numerous times, and one of the things that he attributes to his ability to catch bull reds virtually every day he goes out. I think he didn't catch bulls maybe one day during the bull season this year, and some days caught 40 and 50 bull reds, is his ability to read at high speeds. So I think he reads, and Steve, if you're watching, chime in, but 300 feet to either side of his boat at 30 miles an hour, which I think is, that's a huge, huge edge. But East Wind Fishing asks, explain engine interference and mounting locations, because both of those things, you can't have engine interference or, prop wash or, a bad mounting location and be able to read at 30 miles an hour.
Definitely. That is a big subject when it comes to mounting transducers and, transducer placement in general. There are guys who are much better than me at this, but one of the biggest things with side imaging is usually the element is in the back of the the furthest part in the transducer from the boat. So if you have a outboard engine that comes close to your transducer, you might get blockage from that. What that can require is you to tilt up your motor when you want your side imaging to be perfectly clear on both sides, which is, commonly seen. Or at least Humminbird offers a Y cable where you can run a transducer on either side of the motor, and we'll split each side imaging beam into one and basically make it the same as having one transducer, and you avoid your engine blockage. But that's a big thing to consider. I've seen a lot of people, post images. Why does it look like this? A lot of it is try trimming up, and that usually is the answer. Other things to consider, we were just talking about Steve getting, reading of side imaging at 30 miles an hour. I've seen it a few times. A lot of it is hull design, some of the best placement you can possibly have. On my boat, I personally lose it around 10. Through hull transducers can improve that as well, especially with keeping 2D bottom. Side imaging is still going to be hard. It's just a lot of data, but I was talking to Steve the other day, and it's very impressive. I've been on one other boat like that. But a lot of that comes into play. The angle of the transducer, if you angle it one way or the other a little more, you might get better readings. It could be very finicky. If you keep your boat on a trailer and you go one day and you're like, hey, I'm not keeping speed past 10 miles an hour. Try tilting it down a little bit. Not a ton, just a few degrees. Run it the next day, see if it's any better. Little adjustments like that can make a huge difference. people don't realize, just a few degrees can really make a difference on how it reads the bottom. Some hulls will just never really read perfectly good 2D bottom at speed, or even, side imaging, whatever it might be, at speed. And in that case, there's a few different options. You can look at a through hull transducer, which will do really well, or a shoot through, which doesn't actually penetrate the hull, but goes inside and the sonar penetrates it. And both those will help you track better at speed and solve some of the issues you might see there.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Y cable. Another thing that people can do, and it may be a little more than some people are willing to do, is you can put a bracket on the back of your boat that pushes your motors back, 2 feet. I put a jack plate on my boat. I didn't care about the performance increase. It was all to get that motor shaft and the propeller away from my transducer. It made a huge difference because I didn't want to trim up every time I was, wanting to get that clear image. So just that bracket pushed it back 6 or 7 inches, and completely solved the problem for me.
Definitely. That is a common thing. And the other thing we'll often see is people will mount a transducer right in front of a intake or something like that. You definitely want to look that your transducer is clear of anything in front of it that is going to cause cavitation and bubbles and whatnot. And you want to make sure you don't put it right in line with your prop, because it can cause cavitation and whatnot for your prop.
Correct.
So those are two important things to note when, mounting a transducer.
Fortunately, there's a drain plug right in line with your prop in most cases. So that's going to prevent you from doing that. That's kind of
it gets a little tricky.
For sure. Matthew Ferenchak asked, and I apologize if I've obliterated your name, is there a scroll speed you would recommend for bay jigging for stripers?
I usually run it at the max scroll speed, which is 10 on our units, but everyone defines their max as different things. If I'm running side imaging, I usually just run it at middle speed, because usually when I'm running side imaging, I'm mainly searching and looking for stuff, and I don't exactly care the second it's behind me. I just need to get the whole picture and kind of find it. And also, often when you're running side imaging, you might see them way off to the side, then you're going to circle back anyway. And that's where I kind of want that 2D imaging as well, to see right when I'm on top of them or whatever it might be. But yeah, for the scroll speed, I usually run it as high as possible, or, slightly off.
Yeah, it's interesting. You run yours a lot faster than I do, but I have noticed, particularly on side imaging, if your scroll speed is not right for your situation, the image itself can be stretched and you lose a lot of detail.
Yes. Yeah,
Why is that?
I can't really probably explain in technical terms why it is, but it's kind of doing exactly what you're saying. It's stretching the image because it's trying to pull it along, or faster or slower, and it's enlarging or shrinking the data. You can see it with 2D too. You can make stuff look longer and shorter than it really is.
So is there a disadvantage from, I'm asking this for my own personal use here. That's one of the wonderful things about running this show, is you can ask all your questions. But is there a disadvantage? I mean, so there's a disadvantage of running it too slow, but running it at its max setting, you're getting the most recent data as quickly as possible. Is there a drawback?
On side imaging, I really don't like maxing it out. I think it just kind of compresses the data a lot. On 2D, if you want really pretty screenshots, I think it's better to have it a little slower, not like slower than the medium speed, but if you're actively jigging and want the most, live data on your screen, then the highest scroll speed is usually the best option. But if you're newer to looking at 2D sonar, you might not want to, turn it all the way up the first time, because you might want to identify those cleaner looking marks and kind of get a feel for what you're looking for.
I want to go ahead and say something, because I want to put this out in the world, and hopefully people will stop saying it when I'm on a boat with them. But if you see a mark on your traditional or your side imaging that looks like it's 12 feet long, that is not a 12-foot fish. That is, your scroll settings are set in a way, and the beam is hitting the same fish that's not moving over and over and over again. But I've had people say, it must be 6 feet long.
Yes. I mean, we'll see it all the time. Guys will put their trolling motor on and put spot lock down, and then, they'll just be like, oh, they're right next to us. Why aren't we catching them? It's like, no, that's the rock over there, and it hasn't moved, and it's continually hitting the beam, or the fish might still be there, whatever it might be. That is exactly why it'll stretch out like that. Or sometimes people will say, why do I have this line? It could be because your motor's blocking it, and that's what the line is from too. But that's
another thing I want to fix in the world. And before I get back to everyone else's questions, this is apparently all just for me. But why should people definitely and always, in order to keep from being a horrible person, turn off their fish symbols?
Oh God.
Like if I get in someone's boat and they got fish symbols turned on, I'm like, this is a noob. I can't fish with you.
Not good. Don't turn on fish symbols. That's the first rule in how not to learn how to use your sonar. The machine is smart, but it's probably not as smart as the naked eye, in that it can identify a blob in the water, but a random blob to us isn't a fish. A random blob to the fish finder is a fish. 50 random blobs are fish to us, and they know that. But there's a lot of things that get misrepresented, and it takes away your ability to actually learn what you're supposed to be looking for. And it applies on down imaging 2D, it can kind of go across the board. I've never seen anyone run it on side imaging, but nonetheless, it really takes away from the opportunity to learn. I see people do it for far too long, and they're like, I can't read sonar without it. And I'm like, well, you can't read it with it either. So,
well, I mean, also it's going to lead to a lot of those days where you get back to the dock and you're like, there were fish everywhere, but we just couldn't catch them. And if the fish symbols were on, there probably weren't fish everywhere. But enough of my questions. Todd Lester asked, should scroll speed match your boat speed?
That's always a common thought for people. I'm not the biggest believer in it. Once again, I think that can be somewhat user preference, but I usually run mine pretty standard, right in the middle, right around 5. But people do, kind of have an eye for what they like, and that really can be one of the factors. I personally do not touch my scroll speed much at all when it comes to side imaging. When it comes to 2D, I usually, like I said, I just have it pretty much maxed up there, and down imaging's right around the same. So,
well, we're going to have to go a little bit into a speed round here because we got 6 minutes left. We got more questions than minutes, so let's try to do a lightning round here. Rich Forfa, how you doing, Rich? Welcome back. On my boat, I find side imaging Humminbirds is best at slow speed. There's a prominent captain, Steve Griffin, I'm pretty sure he's talking about, who states that you can use side imaging at fast cruising speeds. How do you set up the system to do this?
I would love to say that it is possible to where Steve has it every time, but I think a lot of that has to do with his hull design as well as just possible perfect transducer placement. I've seen it on one other boat. I think it was a Sea Hunt Bay boat where it read at 35 miles an hour. I've seen it pretty good on some through holes where you can get 20, 30 miles an hour. So that's really your best bet, besides, continually making adjustments and seeing if you can get a little more out of that. But a lot of side imaging transducers just are not really meant to run at 30 miles an hour. That's one thing I hope that can continue to get better, but it really comes down to just like perfect placement, and it's super hard to do that on some boats. I've personally never been able to do it on any boats I run.
Yeah. I've talked to Steve Griffin about his transducer and how he set it up a lot. And he told me that he set his up, he had that design in mind from the very start. He bought the boat because of the hull design, because of just that. So, I wish there was a magic answer that said, yeah, you just do this and you get 30 miles an hour side imaging, 300 feet to either side. But we're not quite there yet with technology. I think there might be a tongue in cheek with this next question. Nick Garrett, who's also
I'm sure he's a big
pretty well known in this area with imaging technology. When are Solix 12s going to ship? Asking for a friend.
Nick is asking for himself, and hopefully things should be getting better. We actually were just told recently that we're really increasing the basically production line for Apex and Solix. So we hopefully should be seeing more coming out. A lot of this has been due to supply chain issues, but it sounds like right now we're in catch-up mode, and hopefully should be seeing more on the storefronts here soon.
Apex are available now, aren't they?
It all depends, you know. They come and go. Yeah, like I've seen some 19s available, saw some 13s today. It just comes and goes. Some dealers have them in stock, some you know, waiting on distribution. It kind of all depends.
Yeah. Ritz Burgee, how do you angle the transducer to still read at speed? Man, it seems like we could do a whole nother show on speed and transducer placement, because people have a lot of questions, and maybe we will.
The first thing I usually do is try going down, few degrees at a time down. That's usually the best place to start at, and you know, see where you go.
So if this is the transom, right? Start like that.
Yeah, you want the part of the transducer furthest away from the boat to be like slightly angled down a little.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that on a YouTube video and tried it. When I had my center console, that thing could read. It could read traditional at like 25 miles an hour, and that was better than all my friends. And then Griffin came in and ruined all that.
Yeah, and a lot of it is, you know, placement. You can play with it for days, and it just is really tricky. People are like, "Oh, this won't read at speed." I'm like, "I have the same one that reads at 30," but
yeah,
you put it on a different boat, it might not work the same way. So it's very tough. You know, Nick installs transducers for a living. He can tell you it's not a one size fits all real solution.
Yeah, I've noticed from the transducers that I've installed that I've gotten the best results, and this may work for you and it may not. That's my disclaimer. I'm not responsible for this. But if the bottom of the transducer is just so slightly below the bottom of the boat, right? They call that like an aggressive mount. A lot of people will tell you to make it, you know, flat and level with the bottom of the boat. I find I get a little bit better results if it's maybe, gosh, I would say 3 millimeters lower than the bottom of the boat. What do you think about that?
I have found a lot to be the same. I see people get out there with levels and coins and all these crazy tricks and stuff. It's not a bad thing, but if you keep your boat on a trailer, it's honestly one of those things. It's easy enough to just make slight adjustments each time and really dial it in to where you're happy. If it's not on the trailer, it's definitely a little more challenging, but it's still possible.
Our boy E down in Cape Coral's Jupiter Kayak Fishing says, thinking of adding a sonar GPS unit to one of my kayaks. What would you recommend? It will be used 4 to 5 times a week. Thanks. And he's got a fleet of Hobies, but the one he uses mostly is a Hobie Outback.
Yeah. There's kind of 2 ways, I guess, you can go with this. You can go what I'll call the Alan Batista route, which is, you know, the fancy big 10, 12-inch Solix screen, or you can go more reserved normal kayak route. And what some of my favorite units are the Helix 7 or the Helix 8. The Helix 8 is basically going to have the same sonar capabilities as, you know, an Apex 19 would. The Helix 7 is one little step below that. It's still got our mega imaging. It just doesn't have that mega plus imaging.
And the screen resolution's lower too, isn't it?
Yes, but they're both really great units, especially for kayaks. That's, you know, one of our most popular units, and they aren't too big or anything. They draw very little power, run off a nice little lithium battery. That's exactly what I'd recommend.
Yeah, I'd say Helix 8, Eloy. I think that would, I mean, I fished with you. The side imaging on that would be really awesome. I mean, you probably even see under the mangrove. So Ben Price asked, what Humminbird would be recommended for kayaks? We're gonna throw that in with the same one. Thanks for the question, Ben. Bill, let's see. No, that's not a question. I'm trying to make sure I get to everyone's.
Bill's one of my bosses, so he's just chiming in.
He says, does speeding up double print pixels and slowing down omit pixels? That's a good question.
That's a great question. He might have stumped me on that one. Does speeding up double print pixels and slowing down omit pixels? I am not sure.
There's nothing wrong with it. I'll look into that and get back to you.
I'm sure Bill will actually answer this one, so we'll see what he says. he'll know the answer. So I'm sure he'll comment in there.
Well, we are at I think I got to everyone to ask at least one question. I know I did not get to a lot of people's second and third questions, and I apologize for that. Just looking over everything. Yeah, we got everyone. So we are at the point of the night where can you show us the prizes one more time?
Yes, definitely.
We'll do a little drum roll. Do you have a question of the night, Mr. Conroy?
Yeah, we will go with the Cape Coral's Jupiter kayak.
There we go. He says, thinking of adding a sonar GPS unit to one of my kayaks, what would you recommend? Congratulations, Eloy. He will put those hats to good use because, man, he's been down there. In January, he was getting 90-degree weather. So he'll need those hats to keep that sun off of him. But, man, maybe we should do a whole nother episode just on transducer placement and brackets and all that to get the best read. Because, I mean, I think that's a really important part. I mean, you can have all the best technology in the world, and if your transducer is not set right, you're not going to get the best out of it. But everyone who chimed in, asked questions, who watched, thanks so much for watching. Kevin, man, I was talking to Walleye Pete about you, and I think he said you're like 25 years old.
26 now, yeah.
Man, you're a wise dude for 26 years old. You seem to have your head screwed on right, and you follow a really cool industry that you're clearly passionate about. Any last words for us?
Thank you very much for having me on. And if anyone has any questions for me later on, you can reach out to me on Facebook. I'm there just under my normal name. And I think it's the same profile picture we use for the show. So you should be able to find me.
Well, awesome. If somebody wants to get a unit installed or wants to get information about your business, how should they contact you?
Yeah, so we actually do not sell anything directly to the public. We are just the rep group for Humminbird, but I can recommend a great list of dealers we have locally, or you can check out our website. We also have a list there, but feel free to reach out if you have questions, you want to learn more about a unit. I am more than happy to answer and help out.
Well, that's awesome that you're so giving of your time and information. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, guys. We have a ton of fishing reports coming up on Thursday, and we've still got several more weeks of the Crazyhorse Fishing Hour. Next week, I believe, gosh, my memory's terrible. I know we have Briar Landon with Landon Marine coming up. He's going to be basically a boat mechanic. So if you've got a boat that makes a funny noise or a funny screech or anything like that, he's great for that information. We've got Pam Taylor with the Tuna and Tiara's fishing tournament. We got Scott Lennox. Thank you, Lady C. He'll be on in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned, and we got a lot more coming your way. Kevin, thank you so much, and we'll see everybody on Thursday.
Thank you again.